Welcome to Altered Mates, a philosophical podcast hosted by Alejandro Tuama and Tobias Penno, two mates fascinated by altered states. Stay tuned for a conversational journey through the murky depths of consciousness, psyche, and the human experience. To find out more or to support the podcast, please go to alteredmates.com. We hope you enjoy the ride.
Welcome to Altered Mates. This is Alejandro Tuama. In this episode, Tobias Penno and I discuss a paper written by Dr. Gary Fisher concerning some intriguing research conducted in the 1960s. The paper is titled Treatment of Childhood Schizophrenia Utilizing LSD and Psilocybin, and it appeared in the newsletter of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS, as it's better known. And this was in the summer of 1997. I should mention that this paper and our discussion surrounding it is quite confronting, as it deals with extremely traumatized and troubled children who were suffering terribly with a range of presentations associated with severe autism and schizophrenia. To illustrate the conditions, I will quote from the introduction of the paper written by Dr. Gary Fisher. He writes, "The ward in which these children lived was in a state of constant pandemonium. The ward housed some 60 children ranging in age from 4 to 12, who were the most severely disturbed from children of a larger hospital population. There was constant screeching, fighting, and destructive behaviour. Many children were destructive towards the environment, to each other, to the staff, and to themselves. The primary duty of the ward personnel was damage control. The noise level was always high, as many of the children were extremely hyperactive and vocal. Other children were very withdrawn, involved in repetitious physical motions, and when interfered with, would lash out at the intruder. There was little interactive or parallel play, and any toys or material brought into the ward was soon destroyed. Feces, smearing, and random urinating were a constant problem. To say the least, the environment was not conducive to good mental health." End quote. But even more intriguing for myself and for Tobias than the depths of the psychoses that these children were trapped within were the profound breakthroughs that Fisher and his team were able to facilitate with the help of LSD to transform the lives of some of these children from what was a total horror into functioning members of society.
Frat boy. Now listen here, frat boy.
Frat boy.
We've had enough of your fraternizing.
Okay. You ready?
I am ready.
So, the intention for this episode, continuing our dive into psychosis and schizophrenia, and we've got a couple of sources this time around. Whether or not we get to both of them, I don't know, because last time we had a couple of sources, we barely got through the first one. But so we have got a paper written by Gary Fisher. The paper is called Treatment of Childhood Schizophrenia Utilizing LSD and Psilocybin. I think you brought this paper to the mates. Where did you come across it?
This was first I saw published by MAPS, and I've just seen it circulating the psychedelic kind of social media platforms that I'm part of, like the Australian Psychedelic Society and things like that, as an interesting piece of history about the experiments that they did back in the 60s.
Yeah, so like they did it in the 60s, but the paper says, so it was published in 1997. So, like, whether or not Fisher kind of wrote all this up and then didn't publish it, or is it all maybe republished? I'm not sure.
That's actually not clear to me.
Yeah.
The editor of this, which I assume is Gary, has written a prequel to the actual paper that looks like it was written back in the 60s, but the prequel maybe was written in the 1990s as part of the MAPS piece, and they've sort of said that now that the FDA is permitting research with LSD and psilocybin to resume, we feel it is important to share examples of a remarkable experiment, the results of which were not sufficiently taken into account because of the line of research was prematurely halted in the 60s due to political considerations. So, yeah, it looks like they didn't publish this until then.
Yeah. I think it's worth reading the rest of that.
Yes.
That little intro.
Sure. So the final part of that says that childhood schizophrenia is still a difficult problem to treat and causes much suffering. It is a terrible shame that research done 35 years ago is still the last word on the use of psychedelics to treat these conditions.
I just want to flag that when I read this, I also found the podcast with Gary Fisher talking about his research, talking about this research, and it's on the Psychedelic Salon. The Psychedelic Salon podcast is the first podcast I ever listened to, and it's also the first time I ever listened to Terence McKenna. So I was in South America. I was in Colombia, I think, on a bus, and I'd plugged in. I was researching ayahuasca because I'd just heard about it like a couple of months before. This is in 2011. Yeah, I'd heard about it a couple of months before, and then I was doing research to try to find something about it and stumbled across Psychedelic Salon run by a bloke called Lorenzo Haggerty. And it's just like hundreds of recordings of Terence McKenna. But one of the first ones, I think it's like episode number 12 or something like that, of hundreds, is Gary Fisher talking to Lorenzo about this very time.
So you've heard about this story before you read about it.
But that was like literally over 10 years ago.
Do you remember what you thought at the time?
Nah, I think I was like, oh wow, that's pretty interesting. And then forgot about it up until like a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
It's a pretty rough recording. Like we'll post it in the notes. The sound quality is pretty rough.
Yeah, okay.
But and he talks mostly about Nancy.
Yeah, which is when I found a whole bunch of photos that you can find on the net. There's an article, and I can
post that too.
Post that as well. And most of those photos are Gary with Nancy. And for me, those photos, like the title of this, the story, like this idea of giving LSD to kids kind of sounds fun and playful. But it couldn't be further from what this paper is about.
It made me very upset reading this paper. Like
it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, let's jump into it. I do want to look at. I'm just going to read some of the hypothesis.
Yeah. So there's a kind of like a bit of a context that I think is worth clarifying here, because these experiments were done in the late 1950s, early 1960s.
Yeah.
And this is a time when psychiatry was shifting, or at least, was starting to shift away from the so-called Kreplinian ideas of psychiatry, which is basically...
That sounds like an alien, the Kremlin system.
It does. So Kraepelin was a psychiatrist or a medical doctor born in Germany in the 1850s.
Born in the outer Kremlin system.
And he's the guy, I think he coined the term, or used it a lot at least, dementia precox, which is the original language that was used to describe schizophrenia. And basically, dementia precox means early dementia. So this was a time when they thought that schizophrenia was just your brain was just deteriorating early onset. And so, this was a time when most of psychiatry would kind of looked at mental health disorders as a brain problem. But around this time, the 1950s, 1960s, perhaps a little bit earlier, was when psychodynamic theory started to become popular. And so that's when they started to think about, maybe your early childhood experiences could be influential in the development of mental health problems.
So I'm assuming this is like basically as a result of Freud and some of his ideas and the guys that came after him, just that the idea that there is an unconscious.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so these guys, this team of people that are the treatment team are operating within a context where, that's kind of the trendy or the like influential thoughts of the time, psychodynamic theory. So I just think that's an important context.
Well, he says the first line, quoting now, "The working hypothesis of this study is that psychosis is a massive defensive system of repression, avoidance, denial in the service of protecting the individual from experiencing early childhood trauma." I'll go on just for another 2 sentences. "The repression is so massive that the individual ceases to experience himself or herself with any validity. The individual exists isolated in a world without feelings, and this world becomes meaningless." The note that I wrote in the margins, and that we may not unpack it just yet, where it says that this repression, avoidance, denial is in service of protecting the individual from experiencing early childhood trauma. I was like, what would it look like if they did experience the early childhood trauma?
Well, I guess that's the idea of this program, is that by giving these kids large doses of LSD, the LSD will allow them to experience it. In a way that's integrated and held, that means that they no longer need to have these massive defensive systems.
Shutting down like the whole world.
Yeah.
Instead.
Yeah. Well, there's one story that we'll get to later where it's almost like they gave this kid LSD, and it was as if all of a sudden, for the first time, he was like, "Oh, all of you are real? No, you can't. Wait, you can't be real, can you?"
I highlighted that too.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
So they do say, I go on, quoting, "It was hypothesized that the psychedelic drugs could break through this massive repression, wherein the child would re-experience these traumatic events and release the pain." So that's, or release the pain bound to those experiences. So that's what you were saying there, that's kind of the whole idea, that by taking the LSD, they do experience it. They kind of re-experience it. And then in the context of the ward that they're in, with the psychiatrists and the nurses, therapists that are all around, they can help move through that. I do want to mention like some of the details.
Mm-hmm.
So for any one session, I'm quoting again, there were usually 3 to 4 staff relieving each other throughout the day. The sessions were extremely intense and required very active participation by the staff.
Mm-hmm.
And then all staff had their own experience with LSD and psilocybin, as it is accepted practice that in order to understand what was going on with the children, one had to have had personal experiences with the drugs. And I just totally agree with that, that idea, that if you're going to be dishing out hardcore psychedelic drugs to anybody, that it's very important that you have had that yourself, that you are experienced.
Yeah. How can you guide someone through these realms? And especially if you're giving it to people who have these kinds of intense traumatic experiences that you're asking them to confront on a drug like LSD. Yeah, how can you hold them through that with like certainty, confidence and safety, unless you've kind of done some of that work yourself and you've faced your own kind of traumatic past or inner demons.
Or even just know the process.
Yeah.
So the next section says ward conditions, and it's worth just mentioning a few details.
Yeah.
Quoting, the ward in which these children lived was in a state of constant pandemonium. Like I can imagine, of course.
Yeah.
The ward housed some 60 children ranging in age from 4 to 12 who were the most severely disturbed children of a larger hospital population. There was constant screeching, fighting and destructive behaviour. Many children were destructive towards the environment, to each other, to the staff and to themselves. The primary duty of the ward personnel was damage control. So that's the group.
Yeah.
That's the group of participants. At least that's the group from which the participants were drawn from.
Yeah, it's a hectic environment. These are children who, you know, almost all of these cases that we read about have really intense trauma histories, and the environment is just chaotic. And the team, I mean, this is a remarkable situation and history piece here where, they before they gave these kids LSD, they clearly had a strong relationship with them. Yeah. They had established systems of, like, you know, a lot of the time these kids had to be restrained and dealt with physically because they were so intense with their kind of aggressive behaviors. Yeah. You know, this is a really hectic environment.
Okay.
And I guess, like, a part of the reason they were allowed to do this experiment was because, and, you know, I think the first person that they did it with was felt to be essentially a lost cause completely.
I just wanted, before we get to those cases, just mentioning, so he writes, after 9 months of the program and 58 treatment sessions, it was decided to continue the program with 5 patients of the initial 12.
Yeah.
So I think it is important to acknowledge that it's like this approach didn't necessarily work for all of the children, and it was deemed not appropriate for all of them. But there were a few, and those are the cases that are highlighted in this paper, where it had a dramatic effect. Like it helped them dramatically.
Yeah.
He writes, the children discontinued from the program were characterised by a lack of speech and infantile autism and were the least responsive to the treatment. But yeah, should we look at some of the cases? Like the first one, Patty, she was not psychotic. But Timmy, I don't know, I looked at Timmy, did you?
Yeah. Timmy's a very interesting case. And he was, severely autistic boy. Mm-hmm. And he was 10 years old. And I highlighted this because I just thought it was very interesting that they wrote this, that he was a challenge as he was very resistant to abandoning his psychotic defenses. And so I thought that was interesting because they're kind of like portraying these psychotic defenses as this kind of conscious attempt to protect oneself. Mm-hmm.
Stop being psychotic.
Yeah, stop choosing to have this this massive repressive system that they described before. But you know,
so like his symptoms.
Yeah.
Before treatment, I'm quoting, he was highly encapsulated, repeating a few phrases and displaying repetitive catatonic posturing. And then he had 10 sessions over a period of 10 months with dosages of up to 400 micrograms of LSD, which is a big dose.
Yeah, I read that and I put it in a big square.
Yeah, that is big.
That's crazy.
That's big.
Excuse the pun.
So before the treatment, he would, quote, not allow himself to be touched, had no interaction whatsoever other than attacking other children.
Yeah, there's a common arc here where a lot of these kids were just really aggressive and dangerous and had to be restrained from themselves, from hurting themselves or hurting other people. And there's this kind of like common arc I noticed across many of these stories where these kids, they did have this really resistant, defensive posturing
Yeah.
and highly aggressive. And it's almost like there was no channel of like communication into them and their real world. And then they took the LSD and it broke down these defenses. And
Fisher writes, Timmy's first 4 sessions were almost exclusively devoted to biting, chewing, and aggressive oral behaviour. We observed this with all patients, evidencing extreme oral rage.
Yes.
You can see the influence of Freudian psychology on this, the idea of like the oral fixation, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But it's interesting, right? Like to think about what is it about the biting, chewing, and aggressive oral behaviour that they all demonstrate.
Yeah. Well, so I have my working hypothesis, which is just something along the lines of like these kids were severely neglected or abused.
Yeah.
They didn't get their needs met, and probably like at an early age didn't get their needs met for, you know, like the teat of the mother suckling. And so embedded in their jaw and that system is this kind of rage, which underneath it is a yearning for the nurturing. And you see that in the arc here, like they all have many really intense sessions where they're like biting, chewing, aggressive. And yeah, what's interesting is that the common arc is that their aggression eventually fades towards the end of the psychedelic experience often, and then they finally allow the treatment staff to hold them, nurture them, feed them.
I think it is worth mentioning that like the kind of breakthroughs do not happen quickly, and it's like over a number of sessions, and often like written throughout this paper is like we spent about 6 hours dealing with their panic, anxiety, biting. So it's like it's not like it was a quick fix, and they had a whole team that was basically working round the clock as these kids are going through
like a
these
whole
sessions.
year of like monthly 400 microgram LSD experiences.
But then you get things like, and I'm quoting, during a later session, after some 2 hours of being out of contact, he sat up rather suddenly, his eyes widened with astonishment, and he whispered, "I saw God." During later sessions, he evidenced a much larger vocabulary and abandoned his echolalia and repetitive speech.
Yes. And, you know, just to like round this off, the parents commented at the end, they write that his parents began taking him home for weekends due to these behavioural changes, and they repeatedly told us that they were amazed at his improvement. And so, what a story! And what I want to know is, what did Timmy see
when he saw God?
Yeah, what did he see? How did he relay this experience? They don't tell. I know.
God.
Yeah.
Don't you know what God looks like? Duh.
Yeah. I wish I could ask Timmy what he saw. Alas, I cannot do that, and we can only wonder.
I imagine it was a mystical experience, so it's ineffable.
Of course.
We already figured that out.
Of course. We have.
Okay, so Stevie, this 9-year-old, I'm quoting, very small boy, had a total of 13 sessions over a 10-month period. Prior to treatment, Stevie was extremely withdrawn and isolated and responded to no one. He vacillated between extreme catatonia and excited catatonic rage reactions. He would become assaultive and destructive, and especially physically aggressive towards younger and more helpless children. During these times, he had to be placed in a camisole, which is a full straitjacket, and seclusion. He never spoke to anyone, made no eye contact, and lived exclusively in his own world. What was unique about this boy's psychedelic experiences was his ability to enjoy sensory experiences that are commonly experienced by the normal person. During the first 2 hours, he would delight in the visual and auditory experiences and constantly comment about what he was experiencing.
I really like I would like to read the next couple of lines.
Yeah.
I highlighted this because I just noticed it was a It was a radical shift.
Well, I highlighted the whole thing.
Oh, you've highlighted the whole thing. Okay. All right, cool.
Anyway, go.
Okay. So the next section says, we soon discovered Stevie had an extensive vocabulary which he never used in his usual state. He would say such things as, the music is following the designs. He would laugh and say, I love you, designs, heart designs. Ah, what a beautiful lady. A whole house full of changes. He rhythmically moved his body very gracefully to the music. He became extremely animated, smiling, sometimes giggling, and appearing very much enchanted by his experiences. So I just read that and I thought, oh, like, wow. Like from a child that you wouldn't think would even be capable of such kind of poetic experiences to that. And I wonder if he had a transcendental experience in his...
It also, like, it makes me think of the idea that, like, it's all within him, that, like, he has the capability, and that it's just that something has happened that's causing him to block it, to refuse to let it out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's right.
Fuck! Yes. It is like that. And it's like that. Yeah, it's like he's taken this LSD, it's bypassed, or it's like temporarily shelved his extreme sort of like repressive avoidance structure of defensive posturing, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And actually he's just allowed to be a kid again for a second. And he has some words that he can put to that. But he's just experiencing the joyful kind of like pleasure of being in the world, in the present moment, and experiencing sensory experiences.
Later on in that paragraph that you were reading, Fisher writes, he would run down to the treatment room and participate in preparing it by setting out the things that we would typically bring: fruit, cookies, flowers, pictures, record albums, and so forth. Just before that, after the first few sessions, he became very excited when we told him he was going to have another session. He would then want the music started. He was acting like a typical normal person in preparing themselves for a session.
Yeah, yeah, it's so good. He's like acting like a little adult. That like one of us, preparing for our little journey.
Yeah,
like
he's getting all excited.
They got like out of this pool of participants, one of these kids turned out to be like a little budding psychonaut. That's like, yeah, we're gonna do the thing again. And
okay, I want to read the next paragraph.
Yes, and I before you read it, I just want to say that this was the paragraph where I first really noticed this common arc that I describe, moving from really intense, volatile, aggressive, fearful kind of experiences through to allowing staff to nurture and connect with them. So just bear that in mind as you listen.
Okay, so next paragraph, Fisher writes, in the second phase, Stevie, would exhibit intense turmoil, conflict, fear, and agitation. He indulged in the entire gamut of behaviours and emotions: biting, spitting, profuse and prolonged swearing, and extreme hyperactivity, destructiveness, and total catatonic withdrawal. He would carry on extended dialogues between two or possibly more people, evidencing conflict between his mother, father, and himself. There was a great deal of anal and genital content to his conversation, with endless repetitions about shit, piss, penis, nasty, black BM, death, black hearts, throw up, black breasts, black diarrhea, chew it, afraid, burn, it hurts. He would interrupt these dialogues by going to the bathroom, standing in front of the toilet, turning in a few circles and then urinating, and when he ran out of urine, he would continue this behaviour 20 to 25 times. After an exhausting 3 to 4 hours, he would appear very beaten up and would allow staff to sit with him, touch him, hold him, feed him, and nurture him. Fucking intense.
Yeah, imagine that.
So I think, like, the obvious interpretation is again related to that like childhood neglect or that kind of thing. That like the oral rage, the idea would be that it's like it has its origins in breastfeeding and or nurturing and not being adequately cared for there. And this anal stage is the idea of perhaps like difficulties when learning, with potty training, that kind of thing. And so if you've got some like neglectful or abusive parents that are like making it disgusting, making you bad kid, shaming.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this exists on a continuum from very mild hang-ups, from like slight teasing or difficulties around the time, bedwetting, soiling yourself, that kind of stuff, to I'm just speculating, that if it's like really a horrible experience and you left like lying in your own shit and then shamed by your parents, that it can lead to this kind of behavior. What do you reckon about that? Does that seem logical?
It seems like there's a sense to that. It's so hard to interpret. This kid's put so much in that, shit, piss, penis, nasty, throw up, black breasts, black diarrhea, chew it, burn it, hurts. There's all sorts of things that could be going on here, including issues with power and potty training, as well as being hurt physically, as well as sort of like, a lot of shaming and wrongness and, all sorts of things. I really.
But at the very end, so I'm quoting now, his manic and destructive behaviour disappeared and he started relating to boys of his own age and older ones and struck up a bond with another boy in the program. They became good buddies. He became well enough to attend school and was able to function well in that setting. His parents were amazed at the changes. That's another one. His parents being amazed at the changes and started to visit him and then began taking him home every weekend. He was very verbal, became very playful with the treatment staff, and he was behaving like a normal boy. So I'm just realising now I kind of lumped a lot of this shit onto his parents. And if they were so terrible, then would they really have handed the kid back to those parents?
Yeah, that's a good point. I have been kind of running on the assumption that these kids were traumatized by their parents, but we really don't know that.
Yeah, and is it perhaps that it was kind of I don't know is it dangerous for us to speculate so much? Anyway, that like maybe it could have been a normal-ish toilet training experience, and just for some reason, Stevie just had such a fucked up.
We're joining in the world of the psychiatry treating team, and we're kind of assuming a psychodynamic stance here. But it could be that that's not the case.
Well, actually, a good example of that is the next one, Floyd.
Yes.
And I want to read just the start.
Go on.
This 10-year-old boy had a total of 16 sessions over a period of 11 months. He had a history of extreme deprivation. His mother was an extremely agitated, narcissistic woman who made no effort to relate to him at all.
Yes.
Like they're making like assumptions and statements about the mother and presenting it as like concrete fact.
Yes.
As like she was a narcissistic woman who made no effort to relate to him.
Yes.
Instead of describing, kind of the behaviour that she might have exhibited, they just go straight into this is like her diagnosis.
Yeah, that's right. Although, I mean, granted, this treatment staff did work with these kids for a period of years doing intense psychedelic therapy. Maybe...
And even before the psychedelics came along, they were giving them therapy as well.
Yeah.
So are you saying, like, they probably have a pretty good understanding of what mum's like?
They probably do, yes. And it looks like, some of these kids definitely did have experiences of, or at least it appears strongly the case. And the case of Jenny, who we skipped over, is an example where they say that Jenny's sessions were characterized by her reliving sexual abuse and her fear and alarm and ambivalence over the attention given to her. And she regressed back to her early infancy and gave repeated evidence of her neediness from her mother and her anger at not being properly cared for, as both her parents were alcoholics. So I think you can probably imagine that these kids through and this treatment staff over this period of time really got to know a lot of information. So maybe these speculations are pretty reliable.
Yeah. So we're all good.
Yes.
Now I want to go. So we're on Floyd. Part of his history, for the first 2 years of his life, he was confined to a crib without any toys or any kind of stimulation.
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
Prior to treatment, he was constantly hyperactive and agitated, not wanting contact with others. And then I've just got like a couple of quotes from him, from his sessions. In his first session, he says, and I think this might be the one that you were talking about, no, I can't be alive. This is too good.
Yeah.
Later in that paragraph, he says, I want outside. And Fisher writes, he kept repeating this phrase, which we took to mean that the expanded experience he had was receding and he didn't want to go back into his isolated world. This is one of the bits that made me cry, that it's like he's stuck in this isolated world, this whatever it is, has the LSD which breaks him out of it, and then he can feel it starting to close down and his old self coming back, and he's like, no.
Yeah.
Which is in contrast to, like, when I have a psychedelic experience, I like the coming down phase, because it means I've got through like the hectic bit, and it'll soon come the time when I can start communicating basically to you about it. And this guy's like, fuck. And that even more illustrating this is later when, Fisher writes, finally, he desperately started crying and said, quote, I want out, I want outside, I want out of here. Please, please, help me open the door. Help me. I'm real. I'm Floyd and I'm real. My own little boy. And it just feels like there's this little boy who's trapped in the prison of this psychosis or whatever it is that part of his self has constructed to heal, as a response to trauma. And he's just basically finding himself. And it's like, oh, let me out. I'm a real boy. Yeah. Let me get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. And that seems like a common theme amongst all of the kids, but really pronounced in this boy.
So those were the first 2 sessions. And then Fisher summarizes it's for the next 4 sessions were characterized by his regression to earlier experiences where he had been physically abused and threatened. He repeatedly called the phrases, quote, I'll be good from now on. I'm sorry. I promise. Don't hurt me. Stop. Help me. Oh, ouch. It hurts. And so they're suggesting that this is him going back to these experiences of childhood trauma and physical abuse.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really devastating, heartbreaking section to read about.
The 7th session was markedly different in that he did not appear to regress, but rather stayed in contact with staff, but became very belligerent, aggressive, and sexually provocative. So it's like, as I was saying before, that's like, this is a long fucking journey. It's not like go in and do 1 session and you're done. This is like the 7th session in, and he's going back to these like very difficult experiences. He would want to be cuddled by a female, I'm quoting, rest his head on her breast, and then make an aggressive biting gesture at her breast or suddenly start pounding her breast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very intense. And yeah, he would run around the room attempting to slap and punch everyone. He would growl and make guttural sounds, howl and become feral and aggressive. So, yeah, they're dealing with some serious stuff here. There is a line somewhere, and I'm hoping that you know where it is.
Okay.
It's also where one of the children is coming back. and they're like, oh, what a place to come back to, the Fairview Developmental Centre.
Yes, I do know that one. Where is it?
I've lost it as well. I don't understand.
I remember reading that. What a place to come back to.
Yeah.
Okay, I found it.
Okay, so
It
this
is
is
him.
It is him. Okay, I thought, because as you were telling me about Floyd's return and this sort of sense in which he was this trapped boy
Yes.
that had suddenly experienced the world again, and then he felt himself being pulled back into his own kind of internal trap.
Yeah.
It reminded me of this quote.
So this is after the second session. So he says, quoting, this is Floyd, "Give me some more, please give me some more." We asked what, and he said, "Pills, just give me some more, I want to get out." And then later on, Floyd says, "Fountain View State Hospital, what a funny place to come back to."
And then the treatment staff, I believe...
So obviously this was incredibly touching and the staff were tearful. The empathy we felt for him was deep, as we all had had the same feeling after coming out of a profound experience back to our usual normative reality.
Yeah. I think that line for me really, and as well as looking at some of the pictures from this time, really drove home for me that this was a deeply caring treatment staff that they care a lot. Dedicated,
big time. Well, because even some of them took the kids home, like that. The kids would request like over and over, "Can I please come to your house?"
Yeah.
And for a few of them, they did. That they would come stay that night, and it's kind of like you got to be on your best behaviour, and so they would. That was part of the journey. I just want to finish up with Floyd.
Yeah, sure.
So this is towards the end now, the last paragraph. So he was one of the ones that had these home visits. So he would verbalise this saying, quote, "I'm very unhappy here. I want to go to your home. I want you to take me to your house." And then various staff would take him home after a session.
Yeah.
Invariably, he was very calm, serene, extremely happy to be there and behaved admirably. Now I'm going to go to the last paragraph, quoting, "After a number of these home visits, a lot of Floyd's session time was spent in trying to convince staff to let him live with them permanently. He started to attend school and was also able to function well in that setting. He developed a positive relationship with his teacher and developed intense relationships with 3 of the treatment staff and wanted to dominate their time. Further down, he did start to relate to other children his age and had meaningful interactions." And then over the page, "His withdrawn, isolated behaviour never reoccurred. He attended school and was well behaved on the ward, always looking out for staff to be with and to talk to."
Yeah, this is, I've highlighted that last line and just put a line saying
thing
results.
That I was interested in is has there been any follow-up with these people?
I don't know.
That would be so interesting just to see, what their lives ended up being like. Did this last? That kind of thing.
Well, I mean, even without knowing the answer to that, I think that the fact that these kids were being worked with over a period of years, I think that we can say that these experiences have fundamentally altered the trajectory of these kids' lives. The fact that they've shifted from a completely withdrawn state to forming relationships with other people is
and this
astounding.
This is the kind of experience that I just can't think of any other way that it would be possible to have such an experience besides psychedelic drugs.
Yeah.
The kind of vistas that they open up are unique.
Yes, that's right. And this is something that came up when I was chatting with my partner about this, was like, well, how much of this was the caring, dedicated staff and how much was the drug? And they do comment on that towards the end.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And they say, to separate out the contribution of the drugs from our intense, devoted and caring commitment to these children was not an issue with which we struggled, although it was an issue often raised by other professionals. The author had worked for over 4 years with psychotic children in these exact same settings without drugs, with very minimal success.
Yes.
The psychiatric technicians on staff had worked with the same children for many years, again without any significant results. It is only through personal experience with these compounds does one appreciate the potential they offer. However, a strong cautionary word is often offered. These materials are so potent that a person interested in using them must have a very clear intention and needs to have guides, attend them, and etc. They provide that sort of caveat. But yeah, it's interesting that they reflected on this.
I highlighted that passage as well.
Yeah.
Yes, that it's because it's not just, it's like, is it the center? Is it the drugs? The idea is that it's the interaction between them.
Yes.
But quite rightly, that they were in the state where they'd tried everything. And I think Nancy, the last one, is one of those where, and we should, well, maybe let's just get into it now.
Yeah.
She's a good illustration of that. It's like, they had tried everything.
Yeah.
With these kids. The start, I'm going to read the start of Nancy, the first paragraph. Also, on the podcast, Fisher talks almost exclusively about Nancy.
Right.
Yeah, so if anyone's interested in a little bit more on that, he basically talks about her most.
Yeah, and all of the photos online are all
her.
of Nancy, yeah.
Okay, so I'm quoting. This 11-year-old girl was the most difficult and challenging person we treated. When first introduced to me, she was in complete restraints 24 hours a day. She was in full camisole and her legs were tied to the bed. This was necessary due to her extreme self-destructive behaviour. If her hands were free, she would gouge out her eyes, hit herself in the head as hard as possible, bite her fingers, tear out her tongue. She was totally emaciated, covered with swellings and bruises, black eyes in sunken sockets. She was incontinent and refused to eat. She was IV fed. She looked like a beaten-up, starved, wild 80-year-old woman. She made no eye contact, did not respond to any physical stimuli, attempted to make guttural noises and spit, but unsuccessfully, as she was so exhausted. The attending physician felt that she would probably die. All known drugs had been tried. It was frightening to treat her with LSD, as my concern was her extremely frail physical condition and that she might die during a session. What the?
Wow. It's...
Actually, I want to read the next sentence.
Yeah.
Nancy was to be our first patient to treat, and the physician's attitude was essentially that she was going to die anyway, so we may as well attempt LSD as nothing else was available. I was fearful this would be our first and last LSD session. Yeah, so it's like this kid who is basically trying to die. Like, she's refused to eat. She's just...
Yeah, and she's physically attacking herself.
Yeah, if she was allowed to, she would kill herself.
Yeah. Yes, and I think we can probably move through the sort of like examples of the challenging experiences that she had, where she relived past traumatic experiences, was very aggressive and had to do all sorts of things, all of the really challenging experiences that she went through to the success that again came through with Nancy. And I'll just read a little bit from here. After 5 sessions, Nancy's ward behaviour was totally different. She wanted lots of interaction with the treatment staff, became very demanding of attention, and was even jealous of other children getting attention. She became bossy, started ordering other children around, and took on an "I'm in charge here" attitude. She wasn't hurtful to them, only making it clear that they were inferior and that she knew what was best for everyone. So she's totally, again, it's like a child who was utterly trapped, trying to die, now is reaching out to form connections with other people.
And at the very last paragraph, he writes, she began to attend school on half days and was able to adjust to the setting. It was hard for her to share adult attention, and other children her age did not have her sophistication. She was very bright and didn't miss a thing. She had become affectionate and warm, loved to be physically touched, and smiled happily a great deal of the time. She'd given up her self-destructive behaviour and wanted to identify with the treatment staff and be included in the grown-up world. Unfortunately, she was often bored because there was a gross lack of stimulation available for her in the ward setting.
Yeah.
But yeah, just another
example.
And turnaround.
The final example that they end on is a girl called Jeannie, where they don't get into much of the details of what actually happened. They just report on the sort of the results, I guess. And so Jeannie was a girl who, when initially seen, lived in a totally encapsulating world. Her behaviour consisted of hyperactive twirling, yelling a meaningless word salad, screaming, and violent attacks towards anyone who came within her personal space. And so during her treatment course with psychedelic therapy, Jeannie experienced a number of transcendental phenomena which established the core recovery from her psychosis. And in spite of being blind, burdened with congenital dislocation of hips and knees, and raised by a completely psychotic mother, this girl overcame horrendous madness in a devastatingly sterile and chaotic environment of a state hospital ward to become one of the most tender, loving, compassionate, and courageous persons the author has ever known. If Jeannie had had the opportunity to continue her sessions in a benign, safe, and nurturing environment, she would have become a functionally superior human being. Our experience with this one girl was all the proof that was needed to attest to the dramatic usefulness of psychedelic drugs in treating the most seemingly intractable psychotic states.
And then following directly on from that, the next section of the paper is that the work ends, and Fisher writes, our work was cut short by the political climate that developed after LSD hit the streets. Our project was closed down very quickly in mid-1963. And so it's just so devastating that someone like that girl, Jeannie, and all of them, that basically the treatment's over now. No more. This thing that's had such a dramatic impact on their lives has turned them from completely isolated and non-communicative and aggressive into normal functioning people that can go to school. And then that is just totally shut down.
Yeah. It's like a concern that I have.
And it's still shut down.
It's still shut down.
Because what has been approved is not this kind of therapy, right?
No, God, no. It's contentious to consider using psychedelics in psychotic adults, let alone children, nowadays. And yeah, I just have this growing concern since we've started this exploration of psychosis that we as a society are just collectively... basically, if it's true that people are in this trap that you described with one of these children, they're stuck in this psychotic world, they can't return to the real world, that we are actually contributing to that. We are keeping them in their cage through antipsychotic drugs, through our stigmatization and rejection of their process, through putting them in locked wards and, all
even
of that
the
sort of
idea
stuff.
that it's once you have the diagnosis, that's it. You are a schizophrenic.
Yeah. Dementia precox, mate. Your brain's...
This is you from now on. You've got a faulty brain.
Yep.
It's about living with this now.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah. When you voiced that, last night when we were chatting about this, I was like, it's so right that we're making them stay in it.
Yeah.
Halting the progress of this journey and being stuck in it forever. It's like the nightmare. When I think about my worst nightmare,
this is it.
It's being stuck in madness forever.
Yeah.
And that's effectively what we're doing
by
keeping people in wards and giving them these antipsychotic medication that dulls them down, but basically prevents them from working through it ever.
Yes.
Until death.
Yeah, and I hope that that's only partially true.
Yeah.
I hope it's wrong altogether.
Yeah.
But it's an ever-growing concern that I have, that we are deeply, deeply mistreating psychotic people.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the episode. For more episodes or to support the podcast, please follow the links in the show notes or go to alteredmates.com. Adios, amigos!